And we're live. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Today we're going to be doing an unboxing of Warcrow's Mounthaven Action Pack, which Corvus Belli has very kindly sent out. Now these will not be sticking around. These are actually we're going to have a look at them today. We're going to see what's in the box. We might do a little bit of assembly, and then these are going to a friend in Queensland called Reese, who has an interest in wargames. Generally, he's an avid wargamer, but also an interest in Warcrow. And this is a little bit of a gateway for him into the game. So Reese, I hope you have a chance to watch this, but then also I hope very much these miniatures do you some good. And thanks again to Corvus Belli for sending them out. So this is the Warcrow Mounthaven Action Pack, and we'll start with the big action pack itself. I suppose I should note, I believe I have a affiliate link at this stage. It's probably even working. If you're interested in these, I imagine you can click on that affiliate link and then they should be up for pre-order. That's going to be the only plug we do this entire stream. But these are the dwarves from Mounthaven. They've got a little bit of it's an interesting vibe, very geometric. Nice little bit of use of different colors, at least in the color scheme that they've gone with. Nice contrast between teals and then golds. And a good mix of miniatures from the looks of it. So let's open this up and see. So IPS My Time says, excited to see dwarf sculpts. And Freelancer says, yours are arriving on Tuesday. Nice. I think they've been up for a little while. So standard box. Now these should, oh, look at that. So we've got a little bit of a booklet, The Last of the Wilds, which we'll have a look at in a moment. And these, I think, are all Unicool, which is really nice because there are a few materials Corvus Belli has worked with over the years, and metal is metal, and those who know it like it, and those who don't like it, fair enough. Metal is, I find, very interesting to work with. You can get very precise files and cleans, but it also requires its own kind of you need to know how to work with it. Seercast, which I think at this point is generally considered not an enormous success, and Unicool, which is very good. So we've got a number of different pieces in there. We'll take that aside for now. And then we've got the unit cards. Now I will... We'll just take a quick look. I'm going to actually reseal these up after the fact. But if we just carefully open that up, looks like everything's all in there. So we've got Olga. This has all been, we've got the Spanish and then the English. So different ones of each. Raiders. Now I can vaguely read a Warcrow card. I'm by no means an expert. Place yourself, target receives vulnerable states. Propulsion boots. Okay, yeah, these ones. When you deploy using Scout once the game has started, you may use the skill Propulsion Boots without spending an action. So that's a place 10. The War Auger. Now that's a little bit of... I remember the War Auger's card is in here. Folder, I think, is a special character from memory. Summon the Spirit of the Orichalcum. Yep, that's the one that gives out the owl and the bear. No, Folder is not a special character, because Folder, there's actually, when we see these miniatures, they use origami to summon spirits, which is just sick as hell, actually. Alright, so we might come back to these as we go and have a look at individual models. We'll be streaming probably for a couple of hours this evening. 7 PM Australian time. So before we have a look at the minis themselves, what do we get in The Last of the Wilds? So I'm looking at all of this fresh. Ah, cool. So they come with a campaign. One of the strengths of Warcrow, there are some things about Warcrow that is not for me, and some things that I like a lot, but one of the strengths they've really done, a very narrative forward. And one of the limitations about it on release was really just that you had this 3 scenario narrative campaign. Oh, that's really cool. What do I do next? But of course, that was on release. They've been releasing more stuff. There's an actual organized play kit now. Some very nice pictures and artwork. Yep, different, really, really robust campaign play, different choices. Borderline choose your own adventure, actually. Follow the footprints, do nothing. Chase the bird, do nothing. Oh, that's cool. Second scenario, so all of that's just the first scenario. Then we have the second scenario. It's not completely clear who you're playing against, but that's fine. Yep, bug holes. Okay, so then we've got different faction options, and then scenario 3. Very cool. That's a lot. That's actually not... So this choice stuff is really interesting. IPS My Time says, are they plastic or metal? They are Unicool, which is a plastic resin, and is probably the nicest plastic material that I have personally worked with. Very distinct from Searcast, also distinct from injected molded plastic. Injected molded plastic is kind of like Games Workshop classic, it's Conquest classic, it's what's used for any like that kind of material, but Unicool is you get more. They do Unicool minis almost like they would do a metal mini, and we'll see these when we open it up. The bulk of this is already kind of pre-assembled and then bits slot in. The mold is cut. It's not assembly. Yes, it's exactly the new tag plastic. It's very, very nice material. It's for conversions, I think it's probably, because much of how these work, you get like the models kind of pre-assembled. So it's not as strong as some other mediums for conversion, although you can still convert. It's probably slightly easier than converting a metal miniature. But in terms of crispness of detail and working with them and need to clean, really, really nice. And then we have the end of the scenario. I might actually, and then there's a finale and a little campaign log. I actually had no idea that this came in this. That's some pretty good quality stuff. I think as far as introductions to the vibe Warcrow is kind of do, that's pretty cool. Okay, let's have a look at some of these miniatures. And I may actually need to refer back to the cards so I know what the heck I'm dealing with here. So I know that we get in this... Well, that's a number. This much stuff. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 miniatures. These would be the Raiders because they've got these piston boots. IPS My Time asks, with Searcast, does it work better with a really fine sandpaper? Look, I'm actually not sure I've had to do more than one miniature with Searcast, and I got reasonably lucky. I've only ever heard, at best, faint praise of the material. I'm actually more used to either metal unicool or injected molded plastic. And if we look, for example, at... Let's have a look at this. So this is... I think this is Olga, or if she's not Olga, then there's a generic... I think the generic is just called the Hammer, but I'm not sure. Is she a high command model? Yes, so Olga or Hammer. So if we look at this, there are some sprue injection. So there's some, like that's an injection point there. So we'll need to clip that off, so we will. We'll do it with just some clippers. These branded? No. Maybe. A Hummy Painter? Not sure. I actually hate these because they don't open any wider than that, which I'm sure someone thought was a fantastic idea for miniatures. But I tried to do one conversion with them once that required cutting something wider, and it was the most miserable experience. They just needed... That gap needs to go like 3 millimeters more. I don't care if the things... So this is not a particularly fresh blade, but that's a nice clean cut. And then the rest of the miniature needs probably no cleaning. There's some kind of like mold release residue there that I frankly wouldn't be surprised if I could undercoat. It's a tiny little bit. But otherwise what you have is you've got the Infinity style where you have these like cleverly cut molds. So again, we've got a little sprue injection point there. We'll clip that off. You've got these cleverly cut molds, so it's really just slot fit, which is very, very nice in terms of the level of crispness of detail that they can accomplish and assembly. Reese I actually asked, hey, do you mind if I assemble these a little bit on screen? And he's like, no, fill your boots, I hate assembly. To each their own. These are not difficult assemblies. These are very easy. Reese will probably be most used to things like conquest sprues. He is a former-ish conquest player, and these are so much easier to assemble than typical like Games Workshop style sprue. But so we've got Olga here, and she's in 3 pieces, and you have this like neat sprue cut where boom, together and done. That's really nice, actually. I appreciate that this is a feminine miniature, but they have given her some pretty sick sideburns, which is just a nice way of being like, hey, dwarves. Oh. No use for a name 06 says, the day they switch their Infinity infantry models to Unicool, my savings account is going to have a problem. Yeah, and then Legions AU notes that the material cost is significant. So the thing with, I believe, I'm not a materials expert, but the thing with Unicool is that they can't do as much of it in-house. Now, I think this is meant to be, and we'll just kind of hold it up, there is a trigger on the hammer there, and then these piston things, which suggests to me that we've got kind of like an impact hammer, which reminds me, it's not the same aesthetic exactly, it's very geometric. It's almost, what these remind me of, if anything, is Dragon Age dwarves. The dwarf Tigers, God, remember Dragon Age? Remember that? Anyone else here have fond memories of that series that reinvented itself a million times? But the dwarf designs in Dragon Age tended towards that like real focus on geometric designs, and they've done the same thing here. But in terms of function, I think that's like a War Machine dwarf hammer. So I'm just gluing this in, and that sits nice and cleanly. Yep, just goes in. She's on a very tactical rock. And then I should imagine we'll dry fit this first, but that'll just be a, yep, straight slot in. One of the interesting things about Seercast, not Seercast, I'm going to keep calling that, one of the things about Unicool is that it seems to have very little thermal expansion or contraction. I guess that's the cause, because when I've never had a Unicool fit fail. Like things just slot in, and it's like that was a really nice tolerance. Like that her, I'm not going to put her on the base because it'll be easier to ship, but those arms just slot in cleanly, like really nicely. That was just all dry fit and then glue. If anyone's wondering, the cheapest possible glue, because super glue is super glue is super glue. I don't like running out, so as a little bit of show and tell, feast your eyes. Never run out of super glue. I refill this about once a year. Okay. Oh, there's one down. So that's Olga, who is, or as the hammer form, she has a bunch of rules. I don't play Warcrow. It's dice. Disarmed, high command, preferred terrain, rugged. She can join. She's got the elite keyword. I don't know if being elite confers that keyword on someone if she joins the regiment. Whereabouts? Olga, where is your actual card? Olga, Princess of Mounthaven. Big teal eyes and rockin' sideburns. So this is one of the really interesting abilities. During no one gets left behind, up to 3 allied units within 12 strides can perform the move action. I couldn't tell you the specific utility of this in the sense of like, oh yes, this will cause this exact tactical option. But one of the things during my attempts to get into Warcrow, and I will probably get into the game eventually, you are so activation constrained in Warcrow. You have 15 things to do in an entire game that finding ways to get other activations or other movements or anything in Warcrow that can let you cheat that hard activation limit reads to me as enormously valuable. I may well be incorrect there, but that's a personal note. So spots where you're looking at Warcrow because they're great for D&D. Oh yeah, these are. That is a. To be honest, that is a. I would fucking play that D&D character. I would play Olga in D&D. I've got the voice right. I'd probably do something absolutely horrific and like really bad German, maybe. But I would absolutely use that for D&D. So our question was, do they have mold spots in hidden spots? So one thing that you will note is that the injection points are in, so for example, we can see here, one of the injection points, and this is one of the bits where it will be roughest because I had to shear that off, underside, non-visible areas. What they won't usually do, I don't think, I won't expect to see, is in smooth, flat surfaces where models have to join. They probably should avoid, although I think with the Juggernaut, which was Unicool, they had a couple of elements where, so for example here, there's a sprue injection point. That'll be on the bottom of the shield. What they'll probably avoid, I think they occasionally will have to, these areas where there are connections. So actually they've done that here. So I'm going to have to be pretty clever. I'm going to have to be pretty careful trimming this down. This is entirely hidden. This will be inside the model after it's glued. But you want to make sure that you've got a nice clearance there so that there's no gap or anything. So you'll also see injection points there. But we'll clip that off. And just to give you an example, I'll clip this off now. Now that's still a bit rough. And you can actually probably, if I hold it up to the camera, you can see that that's not a completely clear surface. So you've got to be really careful. What the nice thing about doing it this way is that this will be completely hidden. It won't even be on the underside of the miniature. But if we don't clean that all the way back, it wouldn't. So you've got to be like almost go a little bit over the top cleaning that off, because that's got to fit into her. Where does it go? It'll go there. That's got to fit in there. And you don't want any flashing left on that, because then it'll give you an awkward fit. But they can do, and Corvus Belli have been one of the better companies at doing this, because like Games Workshop and stuff still tend to do just sprue assembly. It's its own assembly project. They do very clever things like this. That's a portion of braid, and so you'll know that it's in correctly because the braid will form part of the miniature. I remember the first time, Bit and Kiss were the first miniatures that I assembled where they used that kind of a cut, because previously Corvus Belli, and Bit and Kiss are old now. But when Bit and Kiss released, I remember assembling them and being like, what? That's it? Because Bit is just 2 parts, or like maybe 3, where her entire torso slots sideways into her body, and that's it. That's the entire assembly process. I think if you put her head on. But coming from like Nis Hunters in War Machine to that was an experience. Now this is, just while I'm looking at it, I do know a little bit about this game. These aren't raiders, because raiders are the jump boot ones. So these are the Mounthaven Militia. So she's one of them. Cool braids, nice little detailing on the back. I love just the functional looking backpack kind of stuff. Oh, there's also a sprue injection point on the bottom of the foot. That'll just come off. So I'm going to have little bits and pieces of Unicorn floating around. It'll go into the bin after this, but there's not too much. There's very little wastage overall. There's little bits and pieces. So let's get her together and see how that looks. I'll do the arm that also has a braid connection point first, and these glue nice and easy to super glue. I've never had a bad experience with Unicorn. I'm sure at some point I'll get one where there's some issue with the mold, because at least as far as I can tell, it's so little thermal expansion. The fits tend to just be exactly as they design them. They don't have to design any tolerances. So you just have, as a result, you have nice tolerances because they can just be fairly precise. That, or they're very good at cutting sprues for them by now. And done. She's out. That's it. That's assembly. 2 pieces go in. That's a cool miniature. God, yeah, these would be so good for D&D. These would be so good for D&D. And the backpack is all the same piece. So there's the first Mounthaven Militia. Now, she may not balance by herself. Or she may. There we go. Now, we've got a couple more of them. I probably won't do all of them. I think there are 4. He's a raider. He's a raider. They've got the rocket boots. Vel. We got 1 raider, 2 raider. So there are 4 raiders. 2 male, 2 female. beards, big beards on the lads. Helmet on one of them. Let's do this guy. He's got a cool face. They're all individually packed. So same as before. Connection point underneath. And then just 2 arms that slot in and a kick-ass face. So we'll trim off. Whereabouts? So there's always one. There's always an injection point, but on this one it's on the underside of the axe, and they've clipped it a little bit already. And done. This is probably about as awkward as it gets, and actually I would criticize this a little bit. So this injection point is at an angle, and it's coming off. So I have to clip it like that. And it should trim down okay, but that's sort of the biggest risk. I think that will be fine. And I will dry fit that, but when you have injection points off at angles like that, is the dry fit good? The dry fit is perfect. So no concerns there, but that would probably be the closest thing to an annoying injection point where there's risk. Specifically, you want to avoid risk where this sprue injection hangs off the side of the key, and it did not in this case, so all well. Another tactical rock. This should be nice and quick, and then we'll look at, after we've done this raider, I really don't think Reese has anything to worry about in terms of getting these assembled. He may not like assembly, but it's literally 10 seconds of work. So, whoop. Now, I do want to make sure I do this correctly. It looks like I can angle this a little bit, but I think that's meant to be arm down. That looks... So theoretically, you actually could angle this arm a little bit if you wanted to. I'm gonna probably put it arm down. That looks a little more natural with regards to how the... In fact, I could almost look at the box. The box. The box! Please tell me you've got a picture on the back. You do. How did they assemble him? They actually assembled him arm up. Okay, well let's do it correctly then. We've got a little bit of time before the glue fully sets. So that's neat actually, so they had a fair bit of flexibility there. Alrighty. So that's 2 Militia done. Yep. Kazrakan put the sprue connection bit in between rebreather filters on the face. Why have you done this? My goodness. Yep. Kevin Ovick says, question: in your faction focus guide, you told that you had to play a few games of Ariadne to know how Margot and Duroc, but you didn't really talk about in more detail. Can you maybe? Can I talk a little bit about Margot? So specifically, let's find the next thing to work on. Let's have a look at this. I think that's one of the folders. So let's do the folder miniature because she's cool. So the Margot and Duroc. So I'm not sure if it was actually in a faction focus or if it was in some of my other Ariadne videos, but I do know, yes, I mentioned... no, that's a slightly awkward. There was probably nowhere on this piece that they could have put that injection point, but that sucks, but that's alright, we'll manage. Don't tell anyone I said this, but she looks exactly like the wife of a friend of mine. Down to the facial expression. So Margot and Duroc, which, by the by, having a miniature actually capture a facial expression that looks like a person, that you go, oh, that reminds me of... is not... That's suggestive of a good facsimile. Now, this will clean up okay. I'm holding it close to my body. I should hold it close to the camera. This is an injection point that I would criticize a little bit as well, because I'm going to have to clean this now. And that'll clean up okay and paint up okay, and Unicool cuts cleanly, but I think I've still lost maybe the tiniest bit of detail there. Now, there's nothing for that, because this is the, bear? I think, yeah, it's a bear. And the way that this has to go together, there are 2 connection points and there was really nowhere else to put the detail, but God, that's charming. I don't love the way that I think Warcrow goes a little overboard. Okay, very overboard on tactical clouds and tactical. I mean, like they're cool. They're like 10% too extra for me. I think there's like a Wood Elf. Sorry, Sylvanet, CNN, I think, not Sylvaneth. Different game, different IP. That's like falling backwards through a tactical portal, and I am a sucker for implied motion in a miniature, and it's very cool. But there's like an orc assassin that is leaping out of a cloud, and the cloud is most of the miniature, and it's just like it's just a bit much for me. But this is not. So, God, that's cool. So she's, if you can see that. So yeah, firstly, she reminds me a lot of the wife of a friend of mine. There's just something about the face and the cast of the the cast of the face there. I don't know if that person will watch this stream, but he shared with me from her some wisdom about seniority and my line of career that I am coming to agree with this past week. So cool. Firstly, cool braid that comes like down and around. So you get kind of like, hey, the dwarves are a hirsute people without breaking up the femininity at all, which I like. So the braid is over the shoulder, like it's over the chest and then over the shoulder. What she's doing is she's got a folded origami bear that then is summoning the spirit up and over her shoulders. And it's not overdoing it. It's not like extra. It's got some implied motion because it's coming up and around. Love that in a miniature. And the level of detail is wonderful and crisp. And you can paint like, yeah, you'll paint this bear as like a spirit animal or object source lighting or something. Shogun 0099 says hello, Shogun. But it's not consuming half of the miniature like some of the Warcrow stuff. I think the like no, okay, the more not more recent, some of the earlier Warcrow elements had that tendency to be like, oh, we can do this, so I'm gonna have 2/3 of this orc be smoke. And when it's painted by the studio, it looks really cool, but it leaves the person painting it very little in the way of agency. Alright. We'll talk about Margot and Darok, I do promise. Who is this gentleman? I think this is a Keeper of the Flame. Or Herodrix. 13th Executor of the Master Plan. Also, the generic version would be the Keeper of the Flame, I believe. And he's got stuff. I don't know. I don't know, Warcrow. Prepared for the worst. Your target may reduce by 2 its stress and assault, charge, or attack at the end of a turn in which another allied unit is destroyed. Ooh. I mean, I don't think that doesn't have a command token cost, so that's probably actually moderately strong. It's a free action. It requires an allied unit to be destroyed. I don't know how often as a dwarf that will be your plan, but Yep. How many points is he? 25. Not egregiously expensive. IPS My Time says that makes for a sweet druid or like a barb. Yeah. This would be... There are, like, that. This is what this says to me, actually. You could definitely do... Oh no. Do that as a druid. You could also do that as a really good, like, Pathfinder summoner. Like, that's a Pathfinder summoner. That's actually just a Pathfinder summoner is what that character is. So... Yeah, there's someone mentioned these miniatures are hot to trot for D&D, and I have been consistently agreeing with that in the interest of making her stand up and be on display. A little bit of blue tack on her base. There we go. We can do the same with the Mounthaven Militia. Mojo Jojo asks, would you consider covering the game as a player? Warcrow is a game that I've bounced off of a little bit. I like the miniatures. I like most of the setting. Actually don't like all of the miniatures. I like a lot of the miniatures. I would have described Embersig as like, if you just pitched Embersig to me, I'd be like, oh, that's the faction. That's polished winged lancers and muskets in the same faction, and like a Spanish conquistador aesthetic with the line infantry. Oh, perfect. So no more fam. But having looked at those miniatures now, I actually think they probably went like, they went overboard by like 10% on the Embassy miniatures. There's just slightly too much in the way of, and I'm just cutting. This is a little fragile, this hammer that he's got. And there's just a couple of connection points, not connection points, injection points that I'm just making sure are nice and clean and being careful with, so I held it a bit closer to the body. This is thin enough to be a bit fragile, so I do have to be careful here, specifically since this is going to someone else. If I cut myself on stream, we will just soldier on. I'll leave it at that. And now we play the game of injection point, or now this is, okay, so we actually have a bend here. Unicool does not usually have that as a problem. But there, you can probably see that. Now, that will almost certainly, I don't think I'll assemble this guy. I might do it off stream, unless that looks like it's meant to be. I don't think that's meant to be bent that way. It almost could be, actually. It kind of lines up with the ground. Let me have a quick look at the artwork and just see. That looks like it's meant to be straight. Yeah, it is. So, because that's going to need a little bit of the hot water treatment, I'm not going to assemble that just yet, but we will pop this in. No other issues there. Sick mohawk on this guy. Let's get him. We'll get the arm in. So he's just holding it. He's just holding it down and across his chest. It's got the same thing. It's got that trigger thing that Olga has. And in the interest of making sure that this doesn't go to Reese in bad nick, I might clean that up after the fact. I'll just pop some blue tack in there for now so that we have a completed miniature. And there's our Keeper of the Flame. You going to stay up by yourself? You are. Feudum polearms make for great town guards. Yeah, 10% too much is how I would describe. Particularly, like, it was the Black Angels and the Arquebusiers that made me form that opinion. Where the, like, Polish wing lancers are inherently very cool. I have my Conquest army, actually. I can show this off, possibly. Reaching over past the reach of the mic. I love wing lancers as an aesthetic. This is one of my Conquest big. Look, Jesus, look at the freaking scale difference there. My goodness. Conquest, you might be slightly too fat. This is a conversion. These don't come on the model. But you don't need to do winged lancers any more extra than that. Like, this is already ahistorically extra as hell, right? The Polish winged lancers probably didn't wear these things into battle, historically speaking. But how, like, that just looks cool. I'm so happy with that. These are just 3D prints that I've stepped onto the back of the actual model, and I think it works really, really well. You don't need to turn these into enormous, giant, angled metal wings. That's cool, Corvus Belli. That's cool. You don't need to go beyond that. You didn't go beyond that with the Bucklermen either. The Bucklermen have one, their command model has just that one winged lancer wing. Looks really cool. And then the Black Angels came out, and it's like, the only way to describe it is, and this feels unnecessarily critical, but it was a sticking point. There have been historically a few cases of military uniforms designed to look cool, and that is not an aesthetic historically associated with regimes on the right side of history. We'll kind of just leave it at that, but I am mistrustful of military aesthetic that looks like its first goal was to look cool. And that's a pretty specific complaint, and it's not something that is triggered particularly often. But Feudum which should be completely my bag. Feudum should be, like, everything about Feudum should just be like, oh, that's so cool. It just triggers that little red flag in my head. And so if I ever play Warcrow, most likely it'll be the Scions, because firstly, they're just the bad guy, and secondly, they're the faction with the most recursion. I've got a little bit of flash on this. So a tiny little bit of flash there that just lifts off, but is something to note. Who is this dude? Oh no, this is Herodrix. Okay, this guy is Herodrix. So that is something, that's Keeper of the Flame. Let me find that. Keeper of the Sacred Fire. What does he do? Heals, reduces stress. Healing in Warcrow is not recursion, but Scions have recursion, and I would probably say play Scions as a result. Exalted by the Fire. As long as you don't have stress, target may add the modifier. The modifier? As long as they don't have stress, targets may add the modifier to their attack and defense rolls without suffering stress. Someone will have to explain to me what the heck that means. I think that means the when you stress yourself for a bonus, which a few things have, you can do that without stress, which is fine. Is that worth 20 points? Yeah, good question. Cool miniature, though. Okay, so this is Herodrix? Herodrix. Yeah, Shogun says, sets off the Are We the Baddies alarm. Like, it's not quite that bad. It's not... Like, you can... Skulls and stuff, the Hands Are We the Baddies, is... I mean, like, it's... 40k tends to pull it off, because 40k is an over-the-top satire of certain historical moments, up to and including Thatcherism. But even then, you have to do that like with an enormous amount of self-awareness and care. And Embasig aren't meant to be the bad guys. Embasig are kind of like meant to be the I mean they're an imperialistic society, but also multiracial, modern, forward-looking, imperialistic. So expansionist, etc. But yeah, when the uniforms are like particularly, and then the arquebusiers have these like little, God, the arquebusiers are very extra, and you don't need to do much work to make a handgun in a fantasy setting look really cool. Yeah, my favorite character name of all time is Gazkol Mag Uruk Thraka, and people say that's not a reference to anything. Okay, how do you go together? So this looks like it slots in there. It does. Tactical, what the heck is this thing? I'm going to dry fit this because this could be... Okay, so I see. Okay. This is... I'm going to probably not... I'll assemble the base, and this is more just in the interest of shipping. I'll have to see. It should go back into the case just fine. So this slots on like that. Is this meant to be actual text, or is it like he's got a magical... No, it's magical. He's got like a magical pile of scrolls behind him. And then this should slot quite neatly in there. It does, a little bit of flashing. No, it's fine. Okay. So let's get... I'm going to keep calling him Herodus, but... Herodrix? Yeah, he looks like a pretty cool dude. Now, I'm not going to clean this. This will go to Reese. There's a tiny... This is probably the first one I've seen. There's a tiny mold line along there. I would want to clean that up just a little bit. You could almost get away with undercoating that and probably not see it. Seercast is pretty good for... Sorry, Unicor's pretty good for details, but... And then he goes together. Like that, he's just loose fitting in his base. That's pretty cool. Alright, we've got a couple more Militia which we may or may not do. We may come back to them, because there's plenty here for us to go through. On the Dwarf rating scale, what do you think of Dwarves compared to Old World, Age of Sigmar, or Conquest? I am a Dwarf fan, and each of those does... That's pretty cool. Okay, look, these are What's the Morat troop? I should know this. I literally used them in a game yesterday. Rodox. These are just Rodok boots. They're just jumpy. These are super jump boots. I like a variety of haircuts. This is like very slightly too millennial for me. It's just very. It's a buzz cut. It's very slightly to my My Chemical Romance. But it's a sick miniature. So firstly, Conquest Dwarves aren't dwarves, they're Chaos Dwarves. And they're quite well done Chaos Dwarves. A lot of magic, a lot of fire, a lot of... they got dragons rather than bulls, but if a Conquest Dwarf walked up to me and said, Hashut, 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 I would not be surprised. It's a cool vibe, but it's different to traditional dwarf vibes. Age of God, I don't follow Age of Sigmar nearly well enough. Speaking of Hashut, the Age of Sigmar Dawizar, I don't know the lore. I know that they are followers of Hashut. I have played far too much Total Warhammer. Look, I was there when the magic was written. I remember the old Forge World. Do you have $6,000? If so, check out this absolutely sick army that's been released and will never receive an update ever again in your lifetime. I think you actually can play Chaos Dwarves in the old world, but then you're playing the old world and you've made terrible life choices. So again, Chaos Dwarves. The Age of Sigmar Chaos Dwarves are... I'm taking a risk here and just doing this without dry fitting it, but I'm sure it'll be fine. The Age of Sigmar Chaos Dwarves are about 80% very cool. And they've got a few, like, why do your weapons look like that? Why, etc. But relatively... It's Age of Sigmar. Of course they have bits and pieces like that. Age of Sigmar can't help itself. There is a 10% likelihood that any Age of Sigmar miniature will look like let's talk about the Skaven actually, because they've done a pretty good job with the Skaven. But then they have some of the Skaven monsters, and like the most recent generation of rat ogres have the studio paint scheme did them slightly too skin toned. And so I cannot help. I don't know if you remember. There's a Malcolm in the Middle episode where the father ends up like drawing the attention of or recruiting to a whole row of like super muscular bodybuilders, and there's like him walking down the street with like these oiled up bikini bikini wearing men, basically little budgie smuggler wearing men. Again, to be a raider, do you have to have a like 2010s haircut? Is that a thing? Cool miniature. Wonderful facial expression. Not sure what's going on with the hair there. And the Skaven rat ogres just remind me of that. Like, they're so muscular. IPS My Time says, I remember that. Yeah, I don't know if I've actually seen the episode in like years, if I've even seen it at all, but I know the gifs. Being a little careful, there's some injection points that are on the blades of the axe. Now, that does have the advantage that if you shave it down, the problem is I'm having to exert force on this, and this little like millimeter of unicool cannot take that, so I have to be careful how I hold this while I'm cleaning that up. Dual axes is a cool vibe though, and again, nice, like the geometric designs, I really like that. But yeah, modern Skaven in Games Workshop, I like so much of, and then you have the Malcolm in the Middle muscle men red ogres, and it's like, okay, I'm sure I could paint that. Like, I know I could paint that to look more like fur, but the studio didn't, and so hyper muscular performance enhancing drug. I mean, technically, I guess Warpstone is a performance enhancing drug. Rat ogres. Anyway, how do these compare? So I mentioned this before, but the vibe that these guys give off, he has 3 axes. Do both of them have 3 axes? Yeah, they just have a spare axe. Are they meant to be... Maybe they're throwing axes. That wouldn't surprise me, because they did have a ranged attack. Let's have a quick look at the Raiders card and see if I can draw anything from it, because I am an idiot. Raiders. So, 25 points. I think it's 2... Yeah, it'll just be 2 units. And they've got a orange, orange, yellow, yellow, and then a red, red, yellow, yellow. Yeah, so these are almost certainly throwing axes then. Place yourself, target receives the vulnerable state, propulsion boots, bedoing. A lot of Mounthaven are 2/2. They've got some extra movement in the form of like Olga's extra no one left behind. But place yourself 10 is a non-trivial amount of movement. Now, movement in Warcrow, these distances are always larger than they look. I'm interested at some point. There's a good chance that the channel will at some point feature some StarCraft miniatures game content, and very similar movement system where you have like small numbers that turn into very large numbers because of how placing models and stuff works. That represents almost 90% of my StarCraft miniatures game knowledge, by the by. But that is nevertheless valuable, I think, for the Mounthaven tools, from my very, very limited understanding. Okay. Yep, nice, easy. Goes together very clean. That's a good pose. Not trying to do too much. Nothing. Not trying to do anything ridiculous with that. That is just holding his axes and looking very fearsome with his really floofy. Look, I'll tell you what that hair reminds me of. That hair reminds me of me. Well, I don't have a haircut like that with that undercut, but it looks like it's floofing up, like I've shampooed and forgotten to conditioner. I became very quiet. Mike is not picking up sound well. Ralph, Shaman, thank you for the note. Can you hear me a little bit better now? Something is happening to your mic. Yeah, just if people can let me know how that is. It's showing okay on OBS, but if... Anyway, what I was saying was, this reminds me of someone who has shampooed. That's better call. I just must have bumped the mic. This is someone who's shampooed and their hair has gone all fluffy, but it's a very nice brooding. One of the things I like about I have curly hair. I have, to share a little bit of detail about myself, I used to live in Queensland, which is a northern state in Australia and is humid, it's tropical. In Queensland, I have curly hair. I moved south for work, and I now have lustrous, wavy hair, more greying these days. But if I go back to Queensland, I immediately get curly hair again, just because of the ambient humidity and the salt or whatever. You know that geometric design, like that breastplate and the geometries of it? Shaped armor. Okay, yes, probably. I can't speak to the specifics of that kind of geometry and its utility, but shaped armor is nevertheless a cool aesthetic that you can kind of be like, oh yes, for reasons they have shaped armor. I've seen videos about German panzers and sloped plates and stuff. You can work a little bit of that into a fantasy setting and it looks good. That's really cool. Now, do you stand by yourself? Yes. Cool. Alrighty. So, there are 2 more miniatures where they're just raiders. We might come back to them. Let's have a quick look at a couple of these other things while we're doing this. So, Hearthguards or... No, let's do the War Augur. So, there's old mate. Very bald. Very happy. Little pointy ears. Does his card come in... I don't think so, but I may have opened this before and been like... Oh, no, yep, cool. So, important to note, I did a quick look. Like, I'm basically opening all of these on stream, but I did the quick, let's make sure there's no major issues. And this didn't come with a card in it. I'm like, oh dear, is that going to be a thing on stream? No, his card was packaged in the main Mounthaven pack. If you don't order the set, just something to maybe be careful of. I'm sure they'll pack it right. What do you do, War Augur? I don't know. During deploy step, your opponent must deploy 2 units. Okay, Strategos. Cool, he's a Strategos unit. Targets cannot add to their attack or defense modifiers against you. I suspect that's probably pretty good. And once per round, during your activation, no line of sight, target an allied unit within so in 2 turns. Once the duration is over, the target may activate. Okay, game design commentary, because that's interesting. One of the weaknesses, I'm going to call it, genuinely I think it was something that they probably didn't make great use of in the very early release of Warcrow, was there is the timer, the little radial dial. Now that's from Warcrow Adventures, and they kept it for the wargame, and much of the time there felt to me like they were in the, when I was getting like the first demo Orcs versus Embraseg, it felt like it was completely superfluous. Like there just weren't any genuinely meaningful uses for, and like I played some like couple of games with myself to be like, oh yeah, how does this work? Turns out I hate strides as a mechanic. When I'm using them, measuring them using a centimeter tape measure, but that was, they felt vestigial. This is one of the first things I've seen that makes a really good use of that as a mechanic, where in 2 turns time, you get to target may activate. Cool. So you'll do this at the beginning or early in a turn to trigger it, or you can do it late in a turn to have it happen. Like, this makes use of that time function in a way that's meaningful. I really like that that exists, because if I'm playing Warcrow, and I've not played much of it so far, I've just played a little as demo games, I've bounced off it a little as I mentioned, that does something that makes use of this widget that we have to own to play the game. So I appreciate that as a piece of design. He has really big glasses, like really, really big, and they've just left. You can't see. There might even be eyes sculpted in there. I can't tell. No, I don't think so. No, there's not. But they've drilled the lenses out, for lack of a better term. So those are deep. Those are deep glasses. Ah. From the fluff, the throwing axes are magic and return to the thrower, which makes the third axe superfluous. I mean, I guess one of them could get broken or something. You gotta have the spare. They've updated the cards so often we just print new ones from the army builder. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised to hear that. Does Warcrow have, to anyone in the chat, ooh, I'm a bit scared of, okay, so here we go again. This is, again, just a small bit of friction. That is both the injection point and the key that I will need to peg into. Now, I can see where one ends and where it ends. I'm just going to overcut in any case here and then dry fit. But there really isn't anywhere else they could have put that, so I understand it. But I'm going to dry fit this just to make sure I have a good fit, because if I've left too much sprue injection, it's going to be a pain. I actually may have left slightly too much injection. I'm not even sure what the word for it is, but big dingleberry hanging off of the thing. Tiny little bit of flash there, but not too much. Virtually nothing to trim off the legs. They've actually already done that. Cool little quill. Basically no other flashing, so that looks pretty nice. So this will be pretty simple. He stands up by himself. That's nice. So that'll be a pretty simple assembly, because it's literally just putting a cool hand in. He's got a book, as it was written. And that slots in quite nicely. Okay. Yeah, and again, 10 seconds of assembly. Nice. So one thing to note, nice silhouette on this model. That's something that can be a little bit like, not always obvious, but models that are easy to read the silhouette of at a glance really helps in communicating what's going on the table and legibility of the table. And one of the nice things about a quill and a book is that they're very hard to confuse for anything else. You can't confuse a quill and a book for an axe, not really. And so you have this really nice like visual legibility. He stands out. Like, look at that, right? Look at. I've got so many dwarves on my shelf actually. He stands out from all of his mates because he's like, we've got double-handed hammer. If we put her like double-handed hammer, nice and legible. 2 axes, nice and legible. Axes and shields. You've got a little bit here of like, these guys are a bit similar, but they're using, the visual design style uses these interleaven, like probably like metal strips to communicate that these are like support character spellcasters. We've got the cool spectral bear, that's going to be glowy, and then you've got him. this is a nice, like, visual style, and as mentioned, overall, what these remind me of more than anything is Dragon Age Orzammar dwarves, which is a good way to go. There's a couple of different ways you can do dwarves. I have a whole bunch of Norse dwarves that I did as a total army conversion for Song of Ice and Fire that are probably a pretty similar scale, maybe very, very slightly larger, but you wouldn't notice. And those, I like those a lot as well, but these look more, there's an obvious intent to be like a little bit technological, a little bit like there's a science here, which is cool. Like that works quite well. Okay. And now, Hearthguards. 4 of them, bare armed and big shields. Oh no, he fell. Is there a product description? No. As a little bit of a point, I kind of appreciate, yeah, keep falling over, mate. They're not overdoing the packaging too much here. They could probably make this very slightly smaller, but there's a habit in some games, Conquest, to put a small amount of sprue in a very large box because the box itself is for a monster. And I don't have any truck with that. I'm not a fan of that. I think please don't waste shipping space, shelf space, logistics space. Don't gaslight your players. Yes, I know it probably produces slightly better sales, but alright, Hearthguard. Let's have a look. Your opponent can't suffer stress to avoid being pushed back. That's probably, actually, that's quite relevant. Gain a movable to the end of the activation. You won't extinguish the flame. When you contest control of an objective, all enemy units reduce their conquest value of 1 to dispute. So I think that's the first thing we've seen in this that has that like Embasig style. How tall are their hats? I think they're going to be quite tall. And you don't suffer stress when you lose a combat. Are they any good in combat? Red, red, orange, yellow, blue. Red, red, orange, yellow. Yeah. Okay. So, let's see. How well are we making use of the space here? No, quite well. Okay, cool. So, and just as long as I'm having a whinge about, like, you could trim this down very slightly, but not realistically, not by much. Not if you're doing consolidated logistics, where you're using consistent pack sizes. Cool. Thank you for shipping a unit of 4 in a box this size, not in a box twice again the size. It's just on my mind because I'm sitting here looking at a Conquest Monster box being like, why is it so large? Okay, so here we have 4 Hearthguard. That is a very, very large shield. Am I wearing pants today? I'm wearing shorts because it's summer here. Well, autumn technically, but it may as well be summer. That is a very big shield. It stands up by itself. In fact, I would go as far as to call that a pavise. Now, someone asked how big their hats were, and I may have said before that these aren't Chaos Dwarves, and they're not, but apparently very big hats are not restricted only to the evilest of dwarves, although, I don't know, I haven't read the fluff of the Hearthguard. Maybe they're very bad people. I don't think so, but they certainly have very large hats. And as soon as I finish clipping off this injection point, which I'm being just careful with because once again it's on an axe. Actually, it's a pretty chunky axe. I can put some weight on that. That's very big. That's a big shield. I have to be careful. Okay, now I think we've got the first instance here of... I can't tell what's going on there. This is a little bit of flashing. That's fine. We can just remove that. This is a bit weird. I think that's the injection point. Why the heck the injection point is not on the bottom, I don't know. There'll have been like a molding reason. I'm going to take a risk and just trim that down. The design is geometric enough. There's also a little bit of a mold line along there. But yeah, I'm going to trim that down. That looks right, but that was difficult to tell as a thing. Now, how big are her hat? Her hat is very large. Yeah, she's got a Dwarf. I do like that. That's very silly. All right, let's get that together. Point to note, if you're assembling these yourselves, that's a connection key to there in addition to her arm, which actually makes this very easy to put together. But it means that she has her shield is resting in a tactical rock. I'm going to do this a little carefully. There we go. God, that's... Now, I criticized before Embersig for being extra. And I stand by that. I want... Embersig is using very real-life inspirations, Spanish, Polish. This is extra, but I'm okay with it in this instance. Because look at that model. look at that. Look at that shield. Look at that. That's that's so funny. Like I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. She's jacked as hell. She's got an enormous Pavese shield. She's holding a huge axe in the air. I like that sculpt. I really quite like that. I can't keep it because this is going up to Queensland, but... And again, cohesive visual design. You could not confuse this for anyone else. There is no other regiment of any of these that could be other than her. Have I done some Warcrow games? Why do they bring the doors with them? Well, they're Hearthguard, obviously. They're guarding. It's literally got hinges. There are hinges on the side of this. This is a door. Why is it? How does Warcrow compare to Infinity and Conquest? It's not at all like Conquest. Conquest is a rank and flank. It's a mass battle, strategic foresight, etc. It's also not enormously like Infinity. I think it's meant to be, or at least I think there was probably a like, hey, there's a market for like Infinity players. I think the first time I heard an Infinity player say, "Man, if Corvus Belli did a fantasy skirmish game, I'd be in immediately." I think I first heard that like 10 years ago or something pretty close to it. So that was obviously where the market began. But I would actually say, and I'm not by any stretch of the imagination an expert in like things like Aristea, but Warcrow reminds me more of the one game of Aristea that I have played than any of the games of Infinity that I have played. Warcrow actually reminds me of a sports game. And that's something we could talk about kind of at length once I have this very large hat on screen again. I actually really like these models. That's stylish. That is extra in a way that is not trying to... It's fine. It's extra that is comfortable in how... in the drip. And there's a big difference between that and like the Embersig models that look like they're trying to look cool. This does not... No one wearing that hat is trying to look cool, right? And as a result, as we learn, as you grow older and wearier, one of the things that you learn is that one of the intrinsically cool things about like any you do not try to be cool. A person that is concerned with their image, a person that is concerned with how others aggressively perceive them, like being hung up on other people is uncool. It is trying too hard. I'm not going to use any other words, otherwise we'll start hearing me say things like cringe unironically, and I'm too old for that. But no one wearing this hat is trying to be cool. As a result, these are really cool miniatures. No one carrying this shield is trying to be cool. It is enormous and ungainly and borderline silly. And as a result, that's really cool. Philosophy with Rob. How does Warcrow compare to Conquest Infinity? So yeah, Warcrow reminds me more than anything of Aristea. And there's a long chain of thought that leads me to that conclusion, but it comes down to how Warcrow's action economy and combat mechanics kind of work. Warcrow feels like a sports game to me. Warcrow feels more like Blood Bowl or Aristea, and less like Infinity. And it's actually part of the reason why I think I've historically bounced off of it. And so in Warcrow, you have 15 actions over the entire game, plus whatever else you can get out of your like no person left behind, etc. And what that means is you also have very demanding scenarios. Every scenario in Warcrow is a two-parter. There are multiple things you have to accomplish. Both of them matter to the final score. I like that, by the way. I quite like Warcrow's organized play ideas. But the scenario puts an enormous pressure on you. In my experience, limited, I will note, you cannot take actions in Warcrow that are not directly and almost immediately connected to scoring the scenario. If you do that, you are wasting your time. And so, again, limited experience, but how it has felt is I've had maybe half a dozen games of Warcrow at this stage. A very large hat once again. So injection point on the top, but it's easy enough to clean that down. I will hold it close to me so that there's no risk of me screaming on camera. You have to be if you're interested in playing Warcrow to win, you have to be very scenario focused. And what that means is that effects that seize territory, and Embassig, for example, like one of their big shticks, is just that they just get more weight on zones. But even setting aside Embassig, you have pushing, like a big part of the effect of winning combat is that you push someone back. You push someone back, you get them from an objective, so you can take it. And so what Warcrow consistently has felt like is it's a game in which I cannot take an action to attrit the enemy. Attritting the enemy has very little intrinsic value because it does not immediately win the scenario, does not immediately score scenario points, and in comparison to pushing the enemy off of a zone or seizing a zone myself, the actions that I have access to feel too constrained in Warcrow to do anything other than doggedly and aggressively pursue the scenario. And what that makes it is a skirmish, is a sports game. It feels more like Blood Bowl or Aristea. Now, obviously, Aristea, it also inherited the dice mechanic from Aristea. It feels like a game in which, yes, I've got these dwarves, and they are the inheritors of Mounthaven and the Great Plan, and the dwarves who remember the Last Age, and etc. And like, okay, cool, but realistically, what we're doing is we're playing a sports game here, because the mechanics push it in feeling that direction. It evokes the feeling of the most important thing is controlling the goal. And that dissonance, wow, that's a cool pose. He's got the classic. I think this is the first one we've seen, although there might be in the other Militia, with the very important beard helmet, the covering for your beard. Except, of course, the beard. No, he's got a beard that's still coming out, and he's got all of this hair everywhere. But it wouldn't be a dwarf army without a mustache that has been worked into the helmet guard. Excellent. And also that's a rad pose. That's just like holding a door for a shield. Literally a door for a shield. It's got knocker rings on it. It's got hinges on it. And pointing your axe, being like, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. These are some of my, again, the hats are very silly, but these are some of my favorite dwarf sculpts I think I've seen in some time. Let's get him a little bit more in frame. Their arms are that tiny. No, they've got bulky arms. It's just that they've got massive. Yeah, I wonder how they can slash the space behind their shield. Look at their card if you want to talk about holding objectives. Yeah, they can't be pushed back. Your target can't. Your target can't suffer stress to avoid being pushed back. Your target cannot, and then you gain a movable. You don't suffer stress if you lose a combat. Yeah, etc. Which makes sense. Like that's a thing that dwarves should do. They should get onto an objective and they should hold it. And I will note, for example, like one of the letdowns for Embassig for me was arquebusiers. Was that I put arquebusiers in a list at is 300. What's the basic army? It was a full size game. I forget what that was. And I took some arquebusiers and the very cool sniper lady who reminds me of for some reason of Pelagina from Pillars of Eternity. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to snipe some people. And it's like, I mean, yeah, you could, but you need to get onto that objective. And if you're not doing that, you're going to lose. I've lost the game anyway. Actually, despite the best efforts of a very patient, a very patient person. I lost the game anyway because I did anything other than get on the damn objective and hold it using command tokens. And so I'm waiting for the experience. Maybe I'll read a battle report at some point in Warcrow that makes it feel marginally less like a sports game and marginally more like a skirmish game. And that will probably be the entry point for me. Or they'll release some new faction that I'm like, well, I just want to own those models. Yaldabaoth doesn't 100% do that for me, not quite. They're very slightly too body horror in a way that's like, I mean, I played Crix. I'm not afraid of that as an aesthetic, but Yaldabaoth feels like I should just put googly eyes on 3/4 of the model to really embrace the aesthetic. Which actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, could be very cool. But I prefer to take the take the aesthetic at least a little bit seriously. And yeah, they're that same. The old Boeth. I mean, like the red caps are totally fine. They're meant to be ridiculous and funny, and so I embrace that. But some of the old Boeth stuff just seems like it's a little bit like that Embrasig aesthetic, where it's like, oh, you're trying real hard there, matey. And as a result, you're not as cool as you think you are. But I'm very happy to report that these dwarves do not suffer that. Let's get Doorman. It's interesting to note, slightly different color. It's just a dye. The all injection plastic, I'm pretty sure, is just dyed different colors. But interesting that the shields are very, very slightly different. Like these guys are a blue gray, and the shields are more of a neutral gray. Not an issue. Just like means they were done as a different batch. All right, let's get this last axe gentleman. I think I even like the bear art. So, okay, I'm going to point out something as soon as I finish gluing this. There's something about the bear arms on these. 2 male, 2 female sculpts, all of them really good. This guy in particular has like a like a wrestler vibe or something, where I don't know what the actual aesthetic is. It almost reminds me of, you see, it's an oriental aesthetic. I think it might be Japanese. I'm not 100%, of like big like bead necklaces, usually on bare-shouldered, like muscular, like martial artists. And I get kind of the same vibe from his enormous braids that are coming out from under his helmet. It's a very cool sculpt. Yeah. Shogun says Warcrow rules need a fair bit of work. There's stuff there that literally does not work. I can't speak to that. I don't actually 100% know if that's true. Like, I didn't run into any issues where there were functionality problems with the game at all. It's just that I really value a game, particularly when I'm learning a game. I want a game to be evocative. I want it to evoke the thing that it is trying to tell me that it's doing. And Warcrow, just slightly, with the factions that I played, missed the mark very slightly. It felt more like a sports game. It felt less like a skirmish game. It felt less like a game, not skirmish, sorry, that's wrong putting it. It felt less like a game about the clash of small forces on the border of Empire, struggling for control over territory as the fog closed in, and felt much more about I was trying to score a touchdown at some particular point. And I think that is something that, like, if I pick the right faction up, I'll keep an eye on Feudum. I like the Feudum models. Actually, Feudum is another example of this, doing it like this, where there is a Feudum knight with a goose on his helmet. And the level of self-confidence that a person would have to go into battle with a goose on their head, that's cool. And like in no world should I ever have been personally able to bounce off Embrasig, but I did because they're trying too hard to look cool. Feudum, I don't know the rules well enough. Someone mentioned that their spellcasting was really good, and I'm like, ooh, that's something that I would appreciate. If someone can explain how spellcasting works for me in Warcrow in 2025. But we have another, I believe, yes, we have our second mustache guard. Excellent. Present on this gentleman. Good. The classic mustache, and like this is an inheritance, right? Most of what these kind of look like to me is Dragon Age dwarf aesthetic, and I say that as a compliment. That's my jam. I'm here for that. I think they did a really cool thing. It's its own style, but there's some obvious, like, yeah, this feels a lot like how Dragon Age tried to do their own thing with dwarves. But mustache guard helmets, that is an inheritance of the old Games Workshop Dawi, and I like that. I think don't be afraid to borrow things if they're cool. Mustache guards are neat. Single injection point on this model on the rock. Nice clean sculpt. Otherwise, basically no work required. Now I think, yep, single injection point on this, on the key, clip, trim, and done. Excellent. Single injection point. Now it's on the shield, but I'm hoping. Actually, we will make a very small note here. Something I want to just point out. You see on modern miniatures a little bit these days. This might be very difficult to see. It might be. When I hold that up to the light, you probably can't see it on camera. What will have been done to make these molds is that there'll have been a master, and then a 3D print, high-res 3D print, and then they'll have done something. Now, I suspect probably not cast, but there'll have been a 3D print as a master into a mold, etc. I can see just barely on this flat surface 3D printing ridges that are a product of the master. Now, I don't think there'll be any issues around that. It'll be incredibly minor. I'm just, because I was looking for it, I can tell that it's there. And when I hold it up into raking light, I can see it. It's something that is on more and more miniatures these days, and it has some very, in this instance, I'm not concerned. I think it might add a little bit of texture, but when you're doing things like dry brushing, if you've ever dry brushed a 3D printed surface, you will know it behaves differently to a classical one. Probably better, actually. Dry brushing 3D printed surfaces kind of produces some very nice effects because they are micro-textured. But it's just kind of, if you're used to old wisdoms about how certain things, like it will affect, for example, a wash. If you apply a wash over that surface, it will behave a true 3D printed surface, which this is not, right? This is just taken from a 3D printed master because it was digitally sculpted. And because they digitally sculpt, they can do some real, like, if you did not digitally sculpt, you could not do stuff like these key and insert joins, etc. It's modern, it makes sense, but it will very slightly affect, for example, how a wash will go over this surface. It gives the surface marginally more tooth. A 3D print surface you're trying to wash is enormously toothy. It changes the entire dynamic, but yeah, just interesting that they should actually be able to avoid that. What will have happened here is that they will have printed the master at an angle that perhaps they didn't think about too much. Yeah, I can see the 3D print lines on that. Only in raking light, and because it's a smooth surface, ultimately, like that will have gone through a cast process, and then they'll have produced the unicool mold. And these are all unicool. Like, thank God for that. It's such a nice material. Is it duplicated on this one? No. So on this shield, for example, doesn't have the same thing, which means that, like the back, and like if there were any 3D print lines, I would be able to see them on the back of this shield because it's a very flat surface, but I can't see any. So this one dwarf, and actually let's have a quick look at this one as well. None on her either. So one dwarf, I did note some 3D print lines. You occasionally see them slip through. If anyone from Corvus Belli watches this, just do keep an eye out for that as part of your QA process, because I have to assume that the mold, like the masters, so the unicool molding, I don't know how expensive it is, but if it's anything like indicative thermoplastic, it's expensive. So it's worth taking that extra step. The Warcrow rules are pretty solid from, hey Lockie, there aren't really rules that don't work. Yeah, I didn't run into, again, I've not run into any rules in Warcrow that are like, that doesn't make sense, how does that work? The actual quality of the rules writing, there are rules that I would critique, but not rules that I think don't function. And the biggest rule that I would have critiqued would have been the original rules in the main rulebook for terrain, and that has been corrected in the organized play pack. Good, because that was a serious issue. But no, I've not had. I think, like, if we look at the writing here, and here's a little bit of a modern game design thing. Many games these days do this, where they have flavor text as part of the rule. You won't extinguish the flame. We are a wall. I'm entirely fine with this when it is done reasonably correctly. When it is done just as a little bit of like, hey, here is a bit of emphasis, here is a little bit of like flavor, and then here's what the rule does. Occasionally you will see rules like what the thing to avoid at all costs that most modern game designers do is they avoid, and I have seen some playtest rules for other systems recently that they made the mistake of putting descriptive flavor text in the rule. Do not do that. This doesn't. Good. We get a little bit of flavor. Cool. This is something about this is a a battle cry of some description, and nice use of italics versus tech. Italics is the trigger condition. When you contest control of an objective, no line of sight, target all enemy units. Cool. Excellent. That is incredibly easy to tell what is going on. Effect, not italicized. The targets, that's all enemy units, reduce by 1 their conquest value to dispute this objective. I am not a Warcrow player, and that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I do have to know what a conquest value is. I know what a conquest value is. But that is good rules design. There is no superfluous text. There is no word there that you would remove. There is no fluff inside the actual rule. And even the use of, and not every game system does this, and perhaps more should, really good use of trigger conditions effect. Song of Ice and Fire was really good at that. Song of Ice and Fire tactics cards were really good at when you can play this, here's the effect that it has. And then they're timing annex, etc. in Song of Ice and Fire. I like that they don't. I think I like that they don't have named weapons because the models communicate that. Like you don't have Hearthguard axe. I mean, you could, but like that would be superfluous. I mean, it would be fine. It would be totally okay. But there's no like special rule that has flavor text that you then have to click on. People will play Conquest will know that this, like in Conquest, you have nested rules sometimes where you have a rule that gives a rule that gives a rule that gives a rule. What's the rule? You arrive on the battlefield automatically. Okay, cool. I have to click 3 times to find that. I like Conquest a lot, but that is sometimes a little bit silly. But yeah, like all of this, as long as you know how switches work. One critique I will give of Warcrow that makes it difficult to onboard is the dice system. And this is something that a player with even a little bit of experience will move past very quickly. It's a friction for me getting into the game. I actually do understand the difference between red, orange, and yellow dice, but it is really difficult for someone who has never played the game before to look at this and actually properly understand it. You can understand, oh, okay, cool. 2 exclamation marks adds damage or shield to my roll. All right, neat. Hollow exclamation mark, your target can't suffer stress to avoid being pushed back. But understanding the likelihood of either of these for a new player, this is non-communicative because the dice themselves obfuscate. Like unless you know what are on these faces, I do not have any idea. I'd have to go and look at the dice because I have not played much Warcrow. Speaking of, are there dice in this? No, there are not. Okay. That's kind of a point. I would have to go and look at these dice and count up the number of exclamation marks and hollow exclamation marks to get an idea of actually how likely I am to accomplish this. That's a small friction for someone getting into the game. If you are not a sweaty tryhard, it's not an issue. However, I know myself in this respect. I'd like to understand what's actually going on. And doing like odds probability calculations this is really opaque. I get why designers choose this as a method, but and this as a design mechanic gives designers a lot of freedom. Like you'll see this occasionally in other game systems where they'll do something clever in terms of how they organize an attack. Anyone who's played Guild Ball, the Guild Ball attack track where a number of successes translated non-linearly to different results that you could get. Guild Ball Attack Track was such a sharp way of taking regular ass D6s, I think it was D6s in Guild Ball, and producing an outcome that is non-linear and different for each model, and like so much could be done with the Guild Ball attack path, for lack of a better term. This is a similar thing. It gives designers a lot of flexibility in what can be accomplished with the rules that they have. You don't need to write complicated rules if you write switches and hollow switches into your core rules. The cost is that this is opaque to read for a new player. I can look at a Guild Ball attack track and go, if I get 4 successes, I can push and damage and knock them down. It's been so long since I played Guild Ball, I don't know if that's an actual example. I can steal the ball and do an injury and this. If I get 2 successes, I can choose between stealing the ball and doing an injury. So in Guild Ball, it had the advantage of being pretty easy to pass and having scalable but non-linear success results. This gives even more flexibility and introduces a level of player agency. Well, actually, Guild Ball did that as well, because you could choose any of the successful results. Rolling more successes gave you more options, and sometimes you'd have like 1 success, push the enemy, 4 successes, push and damage the enemy, 2 successes, damage the enemy. So if you rolled 3 successes, you'd choose between push or damage. If you rolled 4, you'd get both. But it could be a non-linear relationship between success and output. Whereas in a classical like a Games Workshop game, I'm just rolling lasgun shots, and every lasgun shot has the potential to do a wound. This adds player agency. The Guild Ball thing did as well. So I think this ultimately is, there are more mechanical options, many more mechanical options for the developers, and this is communicated in a relatively short amount of space. Okay, those are pluses. Downsides, this is opaque. This is opaque to a new player. I cannot tell you how easy it is for this to occur. Similarly, actually, the movement system is kind of the same. The movement system is a little opaque, but that's kind of just a consequence of modern. Like this is pretty modern. This is what StarCraft uses. This is what War Machine uses. This kind of like place the leader in this particular case. It's more than it looks because you're adding in base size. If I complain about that, I'll be complaining forever. Like a lot of the other stuff here. 3 wounds. Oh, these guys are tough. Oh, give me. Where's the Mounthaven Militia? Oh, no, 3 wounds as well. What's your defense value actually? How tough is a Hearthguard compared to a Mounthaven Militia? An entire ass extra green dice, but Mounthaven Militia hollow shield turns into shield. Okay, so more durable, but no more durable. They've got an extra green. And they can stress to gain a hollow switch, which means they will always be immovable. So Hearthguard can, if they want to, always be immovable. Yeah, very clear design role for these guys. Very clear role in a force. We need to get this last finished off. Muster Crux says, "Good news. I have a spare set of dice that you can use. I'm sending these north, but I will need to tell Reese, who is the recipient, that he's going to need to source some Warcrow dice somehow." I would make the argument that this pack should probably have come with dice. I'm gonna sort of say that. I think if this is a starter kit, it should include, like, that's actually a little bit of an issue where you cannot buy this and play the game. Now you almost certainly can buy dice on the. You almost certainly can buy dice and all of the kit and gubbins. If someone needs to tell me this, someone who is actually across Warcrow, are Corvus Belli selling better than cardboard quality dials and measurement sticks and tokens? Please say yes. Please say they've recognized that that is an essential part of the market for this game. And that I don't have to get third-party ones if I have a desire for schmancy. Like, God, I really want. Like, I will admit, I'm basic. If I'm playing a game, I want to be able to buy cool dice for it. And I can't buy cool dice for Warcrow yet. The other big for Hearthguard is that they don't stress when they lose combat. Yes. And yes, that is pretty significant. There are a lot of knock-on effects for that. I couldn't tell you all of them, but there are not a lot of knock-on effects. So that is actually everything assembled, with a note that there's a few sub-assemblies that I've declined to do. Let's get these all on screen. These are very nice. I think I'm a huge fan of the Hearthguard models. I think they're very silly, but in a way that just screams confidence. I'm here for that. You gonna stand up? The Raiders are very nice as well. The Raiders are a little bit difficult to differentiate from the Militia. Not enormously, obviously, the armaments and everything are different. I think the Raiders are probably the closest to being a little bit generic, but not really. The double-handed axes, it's just that the rocket boots, which are a very defining part, dice sold separately, first-party token pieces are all still cardboard. And yeah, I'm already aware of someone in the US who's doing acrylic laser etched, I think, or maybe they're very good quality 3D print. Could be very good quality 3D print. I've seen some nice quality accoutrements for this game. I've not yet seen any third-party dice. I would like some nicer dice than the big flat primary color Warcrow dice. I'd love something with like a little bit of marbling in it, or just something that feels more like D&D dice. That would be really nice. I'm sure they'll do that. They have to. They have to do that at some point eventually. Partner with Baron of Dice or something. Like just get that being a thing. Get that pipeline set up because there's going to be a market. I am the market. I am the market for Baron of Dice. Fucking pays too much for this crap. Deborda notes that there are frosted dice sold actually. Excellent, good. That's really good because that is something that I will need if I ever play this game. Yeah, the Cyanan pack and the Mounthaven pack from Legions AU aren't actual starter sets. Doesn't surprise me. A little bit of an issue for onboarding players to the game. These miniatures are going to someone in Queensland to pick up the game. They are going to have to get stuff separately. So I think they're probably pretty comfortable with that because I'm sending them all of this on the weekend. But so that's a small critique as well. But I think it's surely like we have to be at most a few months away from someone like Baron of Dice. I guess actually probably. So the problem with Warcrow dice is that you can't just take a regular D6 mold, a regular D8 mold rather. But most custom dice sets have like a custom. They've got like a custom 8 or a 1 or a custom 20 or something. There'd be some way to do it. Probably just waiting on the game having a bit more uptick, I imagine. But yeah, these ones here, the Hearthguard, enormous fan. They're very cool. I think the Militia work very nicely as Militia. And they get some very nice character out of the two support, the Keeper of the Flame and Old Mate, Herodrix. Olga is very cool as well. She works very nicely. The double-handed hammer, notable, the only character in the Force that has a two-handed weapon, immediately stands out. Also, only character that has a cape, I think? Yes, also only character that has a cape. So two little bits of visual language that show her off as the leader. One thing actually that I would say about Embrasig, that one thing about Embrasig that I do really like is the Embrasig leader models. The Hetman, the mounted Hetman, Talia, that's her name. I love the Embrasig leader models. I don't like their rank and file as much. But the off the shoulder cloak and the pistol, more of that. They just did like if the Arquebusiers looked like a regiment that Talia was the leader of, I would love those. I would love those models, but they don't. They've got helmets and lenses, like goggle lenses. They've got monocles. Why do they? They do not need monocles. Arquebusiers did not need monocles. They're trying too hard, but that I really really like. And Lockie, tell him to contact us for the Brizzy scene. I will probably put you in touch. Yes. Now that I think about it, I'm assuming yourself and Mickey would both be reasonably happy to be contacted. So if you're both okay with it, I might pop a Discord call that you can each be on and just be like, hey, you guys should talk to one another. Reese has some Mounthaven stuff on the way. Reese is a refugee from a different system that he did design work for, and now does not because he was dissatisfied with how the company was carrying itself, and I think that's very reasonable. I'm quite happy for him. Aggressors are the coolest Ember Sig. Yeah, like aggressors. So aggressors are an example of an Ember Sig regiment that is not trying too hard with the aesthetic. They are like they're just lounge naked. Like of course they are. They're just Empire troops. I don't care. That's fine. That's what I want. They're just Empire troops. They've got floppy hats. They've got like very very cool floppy hats and two-handed swords and hose and breastplates. Like God, aggressors are nice looking models. But if I restrict myself to just the Ember Sig models that I like, it's a it's the leaders and bucklermen and aggressors, and that's most of it actually. I wish I liked Black Angels, but they've taken Polish winged lancers and gone, oh, but let's make it cool, which is like you shouldn't. That's not the way to do it. I could probably do a conversion fairly easily. I have those STLs. But anyway, so big fan of these. Very happy that they're going to a good home. Very easy assembly. I've been sitting here and talking, and this is, what's that, 10, 14, 15 models? 15 models has gone together like a dream in an hour and a half, including a little bit of me going, what does the rule for this do? So this is a wonderful set of kit. And anyone who is looking to buy these, if only for D&D purposes, I think you're probably onto a good thing. The Seinen are very similar. So there's been exactly one issue with the entire kit, and that's this guy here, where he has a tiniest little bit of bendy staff syndrome, which I will probably just correct with a little bit of boiling water. Anyone who doesn't know how to fix this kind of stuff, hot water will loosen it up. Sometimes it just corrects to the original shape at that point. But if not, you have hot water ready, cold water ready. You submerge it in very, very hot water, like near boiling. Hold it for a second, it will become loose and floppy. Straighten it out, and then just immediately submerge in cold water and it will set. And I've never had any issues. I think the Juggernaut. I don't think the Juggernaut had any issues. There was one not Seercast, one Unicool thing in one kit that I've done that I needed to make that fix for, just to straighten something. I think it might have been the Tech and Steeljaw. I can't exactly remember. Very, very small. I will fix that before this gets sent off to Reese, but otherwise these all get packaged up and sent out. Bendy staff syndrome is a common issue. It's apparently very natural. I have a coworker whose initials, I won't mention her name, but her initials are ED. And we are all very careful in Teams messages and chat messages and stuff to refer to her by her full name, because otherwise you end up with some very, very weird messages between I've really liked what ED has done this week, and etc. Yeah, so bendy staff syndrome, everyone. Very, very natural. All right, so I think that probably about wraps up the stream. I'm very happy with how these have come together. I think the Hearthguard are excellent. Yeah. French Ferret says explosive device. Yeah, that's definitely what we're concerned that would stand for. I'm a nearly 40-year-old man. I know all sorts of medical acronyms. Oh. All of the cards, these get reprinted on a regular basis. Let's have a look at the bear thing. So this is cool. So, they've done the Magic the Gathering thing. It turns it upside down, which is fine, I guess. All right, the bear. So you grant these to a target regiment. Okay, I won't actually read this because spirit summoning stuff is really cool. Whereabouts? Folder. Okay, so folder is spell. I think that means magic or something like it. Summon the spirit of the orichalcum. Duration 4 turns. End the duration of this ability if it was active. Attach enhancement owl or bear to target, and then memory of the orichalcum. Target allied unit with enhancement the bear or owl. The target performs an action, simple or long. Okay, so we have a little bit of like interesting action economy there. Very simple. She's a 20-point character. She can dispel. And then we add, we have the bear and the owl. So the owl, beat the wings, place yourself 10, so effectively rocket boots. New folds, you may change this enhancement to the bear. The owl grants 1 blue dice and place yourself 3 as a defense enhancement. And the bear grants 1 orange dice, place yourself 3 engaged with your target. Charge of the bear when resolving a combat in which you participate. When you push back the defeated unit, you may increase the pushback distance by 2 strides. Instead of when you pursue the defeated unit, you may displace to engagement instead of you moving your first move value. So push them back and then follow up. And then you can change this to the owl at the beginning of your activation. So very flexible. That's cool. The little designs as well, like the origami bear and the origami owl. That's really cool. And that's the equivalent of their spellcaster. They do have whereabouts. So the Keeper of the Flame is like, he is not a spellcaster. He's ostensibly a little bit like he's got his wizard stick, but he's not. He's a angry support character. I really like that. That's really neat. Applying, it's a good use of like the card mechanic as well, where it's like applying a card to a regiment. Boom, there's the buff. Oh, we can change the buff. Boom, yeah. I had a lot of time for that. I think that's really neat. Legions AU says, just think, these are the most boring stuff in the Mounthaven line. It only gets more spicy from here. Let me just think about that from the... Yeah, no, that tracks. You release the... Corvus Belli is genuinely pretty good at releasing the base. These are the things that form the kind of like mechanical core of the Force, and then releasing the other stuff. It will be interesting, actually. I'm curious to see... I had a quick look at the Feudum stuff, and the initial Feudum stuff I couldn't really get a mechanical like identity from. What do they do? Just that there is a man with a swan on his head, and I'm here for that. I remember looking at like the big lads with maces and going, I can't really pass these rules. Are they any good? So anyone who can tell me how Feudum play, that would be particularly interesting. Someone did mention that the offensive spellcaster was really cool, and that's interesting. But the visual design language of Feudum is really, really neat, and the visual design language of these is really solid as well. I'm very interested in what Feudum turn into as they expand. Like, what are the weird, spicy things that go into Feudum, and then yeah, what do they add to dwarves? No, sorry, not right. There is a ranged unit. These guys are ranged. What is the range on the raiders? Whereabouts are we? Cards in here somewhere. Of course, it's underneath everything else. How do you tell range? I have no idea. I can see a 7 there. It doesn't matter. That's not how. So, presumably quite short range. Be interested to see what dwarves get. Obviously, they'll get the baby carrier golem. I've already seen some people be pretty enthusiastic for that. De Border says, Feudum are tanky and control. Like white-blue MTG. It's actually a question that someone had before that I didn't... So 2 questions I didn't get to address. A few, actually. Okay, so we've got Eloy Benvuenti says, happy to catch you from Europe. Bit of a random question. What do you think of the similarity between TCGs like Magic and Wargames, especially with regards to list building? I think it's something that is... it has been in games... So one of the very early design philosophies of War Machine, which is an old game now, was trying to make list construction that felt, and actually kind of apropos of that, it felt like building an MTG card deck. And if you think about what existed at the time, early 2000s, you had complex-ish list construction in Warhammer, but not interlocking synergies. Warcrow is actually a really good example of a game that inherits that aesthetic, that list building idea, where when you're building a list in Warcrow, you are looking very specifically for how units work together and effects that different units have. Hey, Olga gives me the ability during the no one gets left behind step to let units perform the move action. What would benefit from that really strongly? What kind of synergies? How does that interact with Hearthguard, for example? What does that do? So This is Warcrow, like War Machine, actually slightly less. Infinity is a game where you have to think a lot about the force composition. Infinity asks you to think about what your force is capable of, but it's a little more limited in terms of the crunchy individual synergies. You need to build a cohesive force that can do many things. You need to think about redundancy, reconstitution. It's more military almost in a sense. Perhaps that's just the language that I use. I like list construction in Infinity, but list construction in Infinity is more, it's less an exercise of building an MTG deck and more an exercise of assembling a task force, which it's meant to be. I like evocative mechanics, but there's a point of difference. Warcrow feels like it inherits a lot more of War Machine's deck building, and there are limits because there are only so many moving parts you can put in a Warcrow deck. A Warcrow army. Warcrow armies are not enormous. It's a skirmish game. That's appropriate. But as a result, you think much more about the synergies. Manshirts 7991 asked, they were looking at buying into reprints of Acontecimento. Do I think that Bagmarie sections are needed? It comes with all the Bagmarie, Dart, and Akali and Stephen Rao. Dart is a little expensive but very cool, and if she has a place, Dart is a profile that you had to kind of be a little bit of a tragic for previously. She was fine, she was expensive. The most recent update puts her in a position where she's a do-everything skirmisher all by herself, and that's really cool. She's expensive still, but there's quite possibly a place for that in a Condimento. Of all of those pieces, Akal Commandos are possibly the best jump troop for cost in the entire game. Like, they're no frills, but they're no frills and incredibly good. Ballistic Skill 13, Ballistic Skill attack modifiers, specialist, like Akal Commandos, just outstanding. Actually, I need to just remind myself, so I'm talking out of my butt, but Akal Commandos, let's have a really quick look. Shokami of Acontecimento. How good are we talking here? Are they as good as I remember? Yeah, so the 21-point Akal Commando is probably my favorite. Like Christ. It's 21 points, Ballistic Skill 13, Burst 3 boarding shotgun, Specialist, decharges, deployable repeater. What? What? that is insane. And then you have combi rifle EM carbine. You've got a serviceable hacker. You've got a ballistic skill 13 Spitfire. They're armor 2. So owning an Akal commando and is really good. Owning Dart is nice. Stephen Rao and the Bagmarie they're fine. They are, and you will use them in lists. They are single wound, and that's the only really bad thing I have to say about them. Otherwise, Mimetism, MSV, Ballistic Skill, they're not even egregiously costed. I would probably make the small argument that, like, in Panoceania, you need one of Bolt models, Bagmarie models, or, what are they called? The Varuna ones. Kamau. You don't realistically, or maybe Kamau like are slightly different. If you own Bolt, you probably don't need Bagmarie. If you don't own Bolt, and Lord knows they've been out of print for some time, Bagmarie are a nice unit to buy because they're a medium infantry with that selection of heavy machine gun, which can be a Spitfire in a pinch, and sniper model. So Stephen Rao, I think you're likely to get less use out of, bit of a proxy for other things. I don't think he's fantastic. I'm going to have a quick look at him just to confirm. Yeah, he's a very expensive combi rifle. Like, yeah, Lieutenant +1 order in an NCO regiment is not the worst thing in the world. Even warhorses, regular Bagmarie warhorses, yeah. Like, do you know what I like about Bagmarie? They kill red eyes, and I like any regiment in the game that annihilates a red eye because way too many people are way too hung up on red eyes, and having a regiment that's just like, no, you're dead. I'd win. But the Akal Commando is the really big winner in that pack. All right, then there's a long discussion about cover, which in Warcrow, which I'm really not able to. I'm really not able. Oh yeah, Nissays. If you have Nissays as well, like if you've got, you need one of those kits, and you don't need more. But if you don't own a decent bunch of Panoceania medium infantry, and you are a Pano player, yeah, the Bagmarie box is solid. All right. Shogun099 says War Machine, a pioneer in interlocking synergy while also somehow also inventing the concept of Scornergy. Yes, well, it's the Dark Mirror, right? Like any game that was so built around having interlocking synergies between regiments, at some point was going to have a faction where those synergies did not work or broke down or there was a design error or something. And it was Scorn. Scorn. At different times, utterly terrible, utterly broken, very apparently difficult for Privateer Press to ever get balanced. Anyway, alrighty. So, we're closing in on 2 hours. I've really enjoyed this chat. I've enjoyed this build. These will now all get kind of packaged up and sent up to Queensland. I will put Reese in touch with some of the Queenslanders in the chat. Just ask if he'd like to be connected. You will like him. I think he's... How do I describe Reese on stream? He's very a Queenslander, and I say that as a Queenslander. It is the only way I can describe Reese. I have a lot of time for him. He, I think, cordially detested me for like the first year of knowing him, and he was entirely right to do so. Um, and that's its own separate story that I do not intend to tell on stream. But we have come good, so he's very good people. Is Reese. All right. Well, I hope very much that everyone enjoyed that. Anyone that tunes into the stream after the fact, this has been Warcrow. Here are a bunch of miniatures. Some of them have extremely fine hats. We don't stream terribly often, but I will always try and pop up a notice ahead of time. And so everyone, thank you very much for joining me this evening. I will see you all at some point in the future, and of course there'll be more Infinity content coming up.